What if the places we pass by every day could become the places we gather? At the Buffalo Bayou Partnership, every effort is guided by a mission to create shared spaces and meaningful connections among Houston's waterways. The organization's vision of community centered commitment has driven many successful initiatives, but today we're here to talk about one in particular. The Buffalo Bayou East 10-year master plan, unveiled in 2019, includes a variety of major infrastructure improvements as well as new green spaces and community centers. This project signals a bold step towards the future, not just for the bayou and for the communities that surround it, but also for the partnership itself as it expands into new realms of impact. I'm Sophia Saltis, a student researcher for Rice's Center for Environmental Studies, and you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM, where we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. To explain the 10-year plan as well as how it symbolizes the current and future vision of the partnership, today we are joined by Buffalo Bayou Partnership's Vice President of External Affairs, Karen Farber, and the organization's Senior Vice President of Projects and Planning, Ian Rosenberg.
Ian Rosenberg, Karen Farber, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
So just to start us off, can you just give us the quick who you are and what Buffalo Bayou Partnership is?
Sure. So Buffalo Bayou Partnership is a nonprofit organization. We've been around for about 30 years. And we actually were an outgrowth of Central Houston initially. So what that means really is that from the beginning, we were formed as a public-private partnership. And ever since then, our role has been to both create and to take care of, steward parks and trails along a 10-mile stretch of Buffalo Bayou. So that 10-mile stretch goes from Shepherd Drive to the west, so the western edge of Buffalo Bayou Park, all the way to the Port of Houston Turning Basin to the east.
And I think I could add to that, through evolution of our history of planning projects, as we moved into the East End, an area that's redeveloping and evolving over time, there's a lot of communities that have their own plans. Fifth Ward has a plan. East End has a plan. The city has bike plans. There's a lot of these things where we've looked at ourselves more than just redeveloping the bayou, but creating that north-south access and the east-west connectivity through that area. So I phrase it as that we've become more and more and more of a community development organization than just a parks development organization, but it's based on impact and input and feedback from the community. And so we look at each project in that way. So we evolve as our constituents or the people, the neighbors, give us feedback in some capacity. Not always, but Karen, if you want to clarify, but I think that's an important thing that we do evolve.
Mm-hmm. And our organization has evolved to reflect what Ian's talking about. So, as time has gone on, we've realized we're not really just stewarding a waterway as much as Buffalo Bayou is central to all our work. It's also, what does Buffalo Bayou represent for people? And so more recently, in the past few years, we revised our mission statement to include people more explicitly, to really say, what are we doing all this for? It's, of course, not all for people. It's also for the natural environment, but it's really about how those two things go hand in hand with each other.
No, and I think that's really clear in this kind of expanded mission, the 10-year plan, the East End parks that are coming online. As I was looking through the master plan, I was surprised. I was like, I like this is great work that's happening, exciting things that are coming up, but also to your point on feeling more like a community grounded organization. There's arts and cultural elements. There's all kinds of things that certainly we can imagine as being something of a park space, but also maybe move beyond how people imagine Buffalo Bayou in particular to be as this kind of resource for connection to the bayou. And I think that expanding mission is really evident. So maybe before we dive into some specific questions about elements of that expansion and things that are coming up, do you want to give us just a kind of quick overview of what the Buffalo Bayou East expansion is and some of the things that might be exciting for folks to hear about?
Yeah, I mean, I will kick us off, and Ian is on the ground doing all the work. So he has a ton of context and detail, and he is our deal maker. He is all the things, has incredible background in community engagement as well. But Buffalo Bayou East, first and foremost, this was a long time coming, this work. So while the public thinks of the work that we're doing, for the public that knows about it, the public thinks of this work that we're doing east of downtown as more recent, it actually was a vision a very long time ago, sort of close to the origins of our organization. So for a couple of decades now, our organization has been acquiring land east of downtown with the vision to do this work along Buffalo Bayou. And of course, that land and the context in which it's located has changed a lot since a couple of decades ago. But in 2019, we released a master plan called Buffalo Bayou East. And then in 2022, we announced that that plan, the 10-year version of that plan, would become a reality because of a huge philanthropic gift from the Kinder Foundation, coupled with significant funding from the city of Houston, Harris County, and we're still raising some of that private funding. But it's all in all a 10-year plan funded with $310 million. And the deadline for doing all this work, which Ian is working on every single day and is beholden to this deadline, is 2032. So really the clock started in 2022 when we announced this huge investment. Again, very much a public-private partnership. And the work will be completed by 2032, and that's the 10-year plan. So Ian, I'll hand it off to you to talk a little bit more about, what Buffalo Bayou East is all about.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. I'm gonna kind of go back a little bit to your question about, how we've evolved. So I'll tell you, this is the first project we've been doing. We built a lot of bike trails and green spaces, but this is the first time that Buffalo Bayou is expanded to building roads.
Hmm.
We actually bought an old railroad right of way, and partnering with the city and the county, we're building a, almost a mile long road going from North York to Lockwood. And that is a result of many things, a lot of new development on this area in streets that are built in the 40s with infrastructure from the 40s, and bringing in a lot of cars and other things that we didn't want to impact the residents that are there in some of these smaller neighborhoods. And it was their voice, hey, we don't want all this traffic driving in front of our house, and stuff like that. And so looking at the best model for expanding the areas and uses and not negatively impacting people. Also, this area has never had, major new storm infrastructure put in, and water and things like that. So basically putting in the future so development could happen more manageably for these areas. Right sizing the park spaces. A lot of times people go out and buy the biggest chunk of land they can and build a park property line to property line. And when we said, well, we've seen this happen before, there's housing that people need, especially when the community's telling you this, uh, how to integrate those things. And so, we've right-sized the park areas to account for mixed income housing, which, putting people, which benefits the parks, right? You get eyes on the trails and eyes on the parks and people living on them, and then you get users. There's multi-level benefits to all of that, but really beginning to look at these projects as they impact everybody. And these projects are really about supporting the local community. We're not trying to build destination parks with a lot of these. We think they'll be great and everybody might want to see them. But first and foremost, it's really about the communities that we're building them in. And then it gets to, I think the next big one is um, we believe there's a history in all of this, and there's a lot of industrial projects, a lot of industrial reuse projects around the world and the country that people have done. We own old gravel silos. We own old metal warehouses. We own old shipping, terminals. And that history is very much part of these communities. And so how do we interpret those into not whitewashing the past, but also making them tremendous assets for the future? And so beyond our just basic park projects, we've layered in a lot of these other things that we've heard, and that, our, philosophy pushes in that direction.
So, there's one other thing that I think I should just mention because we haven't named them yet. We're talking about the area from US 59, just east of downtown, to the Port of Houston turning basin. And the neighborhoods that are located in this area are neighborhoods we're working really, really closely with. And this is the Greater East End and the Fifth Ward. So our board is comprised of members of those communities, leaders in those communities. We have a community ambassador group. And then prior to the launch of our master plan in 2019, there were a couple of years of deep community engagement. Community engagement had been happening for like those 2 decades that I talked about,
Yeah.
but the deeper and more intensive community engagement involved thousands of people, was all bilingual, many community meetings, lots of feedback sessions that all led to, the decisions that Ian's talking about. And that's where we got all that feedback and input from.
Yeah, that limits is a really good point. But Buffalo Bayou East master plan goes from downtown to the turning basin, but the 10-year plan we're in
Yeah.
the middle of is basically just west of Jensen, so right where the North Highway Improvement Project will be, just east of downtown. We're east of that, all the way basically to what we call Turkey Bend, which is just east of Lockwood. It's not the full band, and our projects are focused within that area, um, due to just the capital expenditure that's required to do that. But that's phase one of this 30-year master plan, which is what came out of Buffalo Bayou.
Yeah, but for even phase one, this 10-year plan, is clearly massive. And the promise of the 10-year plan is full connectivity through that point to that point. So we will not just in the end of this have a patchwork of parks and trail segments. We will have a connected network, and people will be able to make a loop not only along Buffalo Bayou on the north and south side, but across it as well. So there will be 2 pedestrian bridges that will be built before that 2032
Which is really
deadline.
exciting.
Yeah,
Sophia, I know you wanted to hop in.
Yeah, so again, thank you both so much for coming on today, and I'm super excited to talk about this project. But as you mentioned, one important achievement of the expansion is the completion of Lockwood on Buffalo Bayou, which is the area's first affordable housing unit. So I'm hoping that y'all can elaborate a bit more about what makes affordable housing an essential part of the 10-year plan.
Yeah, and thank you. I just want to clarify one thing. It is not the first affordable housing project in the area, but it is our organization's first affordable housing project. And we are indeed, one of the few parks organizations nationally that has taken something like this on. So having said that, I'm going to again hand it off to Ian, who's going to talk a lot more because he has been knee deep in this project for a very, very long time, about Lockwood and why and how.
Yeah, and we could probably have 2 or 3 of these calls on just
Yeah.
affordable housing, and we're by no means an expert. I think big picture, we all know, and going into this eyes wide open, parks and other things like this that increase the quality increase property value. People want to live near them no matter what you do. And one thing we believed is making them as equitable as possible. And so from the beginning, we looked at the area we had, believed that affordable housing was the responsible thing to do, but also experience around the country. You could illustrate that, but also the community. They want to make sure affordable housing there. And so we know there's unintended consequences, which are known. So we wanted to, and we're not trying to solve the world's affordable housing issue either. This is an example. This is a model of how people can do it. But we consciously right-sized the park and acquired some of this real estate, dedicated some of the real estate we had to be potential housing sites to do this. And our housing literally forms the edges. They're parts of these parks, right? They're not just next door and fenced off. They're really integral. And we believe that. And these are intentionally mixed income. So they're 30% AMI, which is, low, to market rate. It spreads because we wanted to make this available to everybody. And so we had that idea, but we had to go to the market to find somebody to do it. Affordable housing is incredibly complicated. I don't want to get into the financing of it and even the politics of it, but we had to go to the market and find somebody who has experience in delivering these and doing it right. Because the last thing we want to do is not do it right. So we did bring that partner in, and then that process is totally dependent on money, grant, tax credit. Um, we were lucky to get some Harvey money, disaster recovery money. Unless all of those stars align, you don't have housing.
Mm.
There's just no way. It's too expensive.
Yeah, not to mention that we already had the land too. So that was, of course, not something that most people would be able to say they had.
Yeah, and that's really important that we right-size this knowing that. And so then we thought deeper about it. And again, our first project, we said, look, we want this to represent the neighborhood. So we have a family housing project, which is the one that's complete. We have visions of a senior project. So again, that section of the community, which we think is also vulnerable, because a lot of them rent, and when taxes go up, they feel that impact. And then we also have the idea of single family. So again, each of these are incredibly complicated projects in their own right to do, and they're all one-off. But the site is laid out and defined with the parameters. Um, the first one, we're incredibly fortunate that it all came together. The second one, we're in our second round of financing and second round
Mm.
of tax credits. The first one didn't work out, and the second one might not work out either. The single family housing had some path, it didn't work out. This is what happens in this world. So while the partnership can go raise money to build a park, that's a philanthropic thing, the housing is so many other things that all have to align perfectly, which is very, very hard to do, from letters of support from various people to all the numbers aligning. And COVID didn't help all of this stuff. And then rules and regulations changed. They changed their quotas and percentages, and it's all over the place. So while I'm one of the things I'm most proud of, especially being one of the first projects fit, it's also by far the hardest. And I don't want to think about, well, you didn't deliver everything you said you would. Well, building a park, and we say we deliver that, that's controllable. There's so many outside factors in housing, that we don't, but it is incredibly important, especially personally, to me. Don't know if that answered all your questions, but
And I just want to, I mean, feel free to interject, but I did just want to sort of put a frame around this Lockwood on Buffalo Bayou project to say that we're talking about an 18-acre site along Buffalo Bayou that, the eastern edge is Lockwood Drive. And then the western edge is essentially Tony Maroon Park, which we'll talk about, which is our sort of the green space hub of our whole master plan there. So these people will be living adjacent to that as well. But within that 18-acre site, there will be 10 acres of dedicated green space. And that is a park called Garver Park that's under construction now. The first phase that Ian was talking about of that housing, he had mentioned, financing was secured, and it's open. There are people living there. It is 80 units,
Oh, wow.
and 72 of them are affordable. At different levels of affordability, like he said. AMI is, by the way, stands for area and median income for those who are not familiar with this term.
Not quite as deep in
But
the weeds on housing policy in the area. Yeah, yeah.
I've learned a little bit about this now, only a little. But so it's occupied and it's thriving and it's bustling there. And then these other two phases, the senior housing and the single family are in the future, but they will all be within this 18-acre property, and there will still be ample green space all around there, and that's protected. We get what's kind of cool about this as a parks organization is we get to protect as much green space as possible in a city that does not typically do that, because these were not parks before Tony Maroon
Mm.
Park is an intact city park that we're building upon. But the park that we're building adjacent to the housing, we're building. So we can protect as much of that green space as we choose to, and as within our mission to do, right? So these people will always be living in nature.
Which is
we
really
can
exciting.
we can even go
Yeah.
a step further than that. BBP wanted to make sure our first phase of housing always remained affordable.
Yes.
So we actually ground lease the property to the development entity. So at the end of the ground lease, it comes back to Buffalo Bayou Partnership, not the developer. That's a lot of these models, right? The developer develops them, they carry it for a period of time, and then they can redevelop them in the future. This comes back to the partnership to determine at that time what the best strategy is or the best interest for the community as a whole. Also, a way to support these projects, it costs money to build playgrounds and buy extra land for green space. Well, as Karen said, 10 acres of park around this space that opens onto the front door, those are all part of the project. So it adds value without real cost burden of the project. This park also has a dog park, a playground, and other things like that for the whole community. So all of this supports those housing. And look, we might not ever deliver the senior housing or the single family in that format or this exact location, but it will always be a goal. It's not like, oh, we're going to go build a shopping center on this site. That would never happen.
Projects evolve, of course, but I mean, it's exciting that is. I mean, that is certainly something that local groups are always concerned about. Is as you start to build up these amenities, these resources, that folks can get priced out of their own neighborhoods. And so, I mean, I think prioritizing that is a really important and valuable model. And to the point on those kind of community resources, I know Sophia, you wanted to jump in with a question about some of the other initiatives.
Yeah, so as another part of the 10-year plan, I saw that a warehouse on Navigation Boulevard is going to be transformed into a community space. So I'm wondering, how is this going to be done, and how can unconventional spaces like this end up becoming community cornerstones?
Great question. And another one of the projects that Ian is deeply involved in. So the site that you're talking about is Turkey Bend. And there are two sections to that site, essentially. First of all, context for Turkey Bend is that Turkey Bend it's a really important site because it's where Navigation Boulevard meets Buffalo Bayou. And if you look at a map, Navigation Boulevard's pretty far from Buffalo Bayou in other parts of the East End, but it makes this historic oxbow, which was the original path of Buffalo Bayou, that curves right where Turkey Bend is located. So that is why our organization ended up acquiring this site and why we're transforming it into this community, cultural, and recreation hub. Right. So there's two phases of this. There's the street level warehouse on Navigation Boulevard, and then there is this very dramatic wharf, historic wharf. And this is a former barge terminal. So that said, yeah, I'll hand it off to Ian to talk about this project, which he's very passionate about. We all are.
Yeah, I get the fun to build them, but with a great team, by the way. So that site's a really interesting one because we found it before the master plan. Our president, Ann Olson, was, if I'm not mistaken, president of the East End Chamber of Commerce 30 plus years ago. So this neighborhood's always been core to her beliefs and passions. And she knew a lot of these properties, and this property was found when it went for sale. And we found that this is the only place navigation touches Buffalo Bayou, and the site developed that way because at the wharf, there's train and boat access, and there's a tunnel under a rail line that connects to a warehouse that's train and truck access. So it really was when Houston didn't have freeways, because navigation was built as our freeway between downtown and the port, that it was really on the two freeways, right? The waterway and the street. And so it's always been critical to the area, industry and all of that. And then our design team came and saw, look, visually, this is the only place navigation in the neighborhood, significance of neighbor, can see the bayou. Otherwise, it's very distant. And so their design has created this big, as we call, breezeway that connects the street level to the water visually and physically through a tunnel. And that breezeway has evolved into what I call a Houston appropriate public space, mainly from climate, because you can't stand outside in a park most of the year. It's just blistering hot. And and it rains and a lot of other things like that. And so as being a covered space, it used to be indoors, the space is usable very much year round. It'll have ceiling fans and can be tempered as it needs to. But also there's two now, what I'll call occupied space, one on the east and one on the west. There's a small one that we call community supportive retail, where we're going in and putting grease traps and restrooms and all of that. So as we find operators that can support a park, because this is basically a waterfront park, that can add services, amenities that we want there to provide, they can get in without the burdens of the typical market, building all the bathrooms and infrastructure and putting in grease traps. That stuff gets very expensive. But the other side from the day we kicked off the master plan, we visited with all kinds of community organizations in the city and the county and a lot. And the public library had a mission in their bond program to create a Hispanic History Research Center, an archive, which is much like the ones they have in the Fourth Ward, in the medical center. These exist. The Judy Idelson downtown is one of these. And they began to see the benefit of having such a significant project, part of something much larger. Because their other projects are all relatively standalone, minus the one downtown, which is the Idelson, but the one in Fourth Ward is kind of standalone by itself. The medical center, Clayton is by itself. And so they saw a part of being something much bigger. And so this site will have a Hispanic History Research Center. It'll have a HPL Express, which is basically a branch library. This breezeway will be an amenity as a park, an open space, a place for different events to happen. It'll have a little stage, and it's very mixed. It's very functionally diverse for different events. But working with the library, since there's an archive space, which will be a protected space of valuable documents, they'll probably most likely have a generator. So the space was designed that in an emergency, that generator can kick on and power the breezeway so we can even be an emergency distribution point. So a lot of things have been thought into this, but really as a gateway to the community, not just the bayou. So we're not turning our back on everything. This is all sides and facets of it really are focused on how to support the community from an amenity. It'll be our boating center. We'll have canoe, kayak, and boating. Recreation, education, all kinds of stuff like that. While we're not an education organization, the ability to do
Both
this
of partners.
at this
Yeah.
site. Yeah. So
Yeah. And also, I mean, the trail system comes through here too. So that's something that, is it going back to your question, it's all about connecting people in and through this site. So, it's a part of the network of spaces that we're tying together through the trail network.
And there's a lot of this stuff. So we encourage you and all listeners and everything to definitely get to our website and look at the plans, the East End Master Plan, the 10-year plan, because there's so many layered pieces of this. This will begin to make sense if you're looking at a map and all of that. And then Karen remains 100% available to anybody who wants to reach out to her, talk about this stuff.
Happy to talk to anyone about it.
As you all have made abundantly clear throughout today's talk, Buffalo Bayou Partnership believes that we should see an authentic reflection of the people and potential along its banks. Why do you believe that it's so essential to your organization and to the specific scope of this project that parks can be used as community spaces?
Great question. Parks are the places where different people can convene. These are public spaces. So, I mean, what's unique about Turkey Bend that we were just talking about is, yes, it's a converted warehouse. Lots of cities in the US and around the world have converted industrial spaces for different purposes. But this is it certainly pushes the question of what a park can be, but whether you call it a park or not, it's a public space. These are the commons. And we know how important those spaces are for people from very different walks of life to be able to come together. It feels like a very Houston idea too. And we've certainly seen that in Buffalo Bayou Park and along the trail network through downtown. These are the spaces where people where people convene that come from all different neighborhoods. So, as much as Buffalo Bayou Park and, downtown spaces are certainly really, really pulled from all over. East of downtown, we're doing this sort of interesting combination of these are neighborhood parks. And first and foremost, we want to make sure that we're good neighbors to the communities that are living in these spaces, near these spaces that have been there for a very, very long time. But at the same time, we do know that these will be meeting spaces for people from other neighborhoods too. So I hope that answers your question. I mean, I think it's a really important time to be talking about the role of public spaces in our society.
I'll look at it from a different angle. While I think we're today and 100% true. You also have to look where we came from. And really, we were a group to build trails along the bayou, literally to connect neighborhood along Houston's most significant natural resource, right? It was literally about building trails. we moved into the period of where our trails are also secondary commuter paths, get people to work and school
Yeah.
during all kinds of the day. It's not just recreational. So we made the decision to light them. Our trails are the only parks organization that we know of that lights their trails dusk to dawn, right? Because they're a functioning component of the community. Then, as you go around that trail, then you go through different neighborhoods and zones, and you might go through a downtown, or you might go through a place that has this amazing cistern. So then all of a sudden you get to, okay, well, how does that impact? You move through downtown, and there's parks downtown and events downtown. So as I guess you could say, success brings more opportunities. People would expect more and ask for more. But the point is, it's literally still about the basic core principle of connections for the community, for people that don't have cars, want to exercise, need to walk to school, different ages, safe paths, where a lot of neighborhoods in East End don't even have sidewalks, right? So that's
Right.
our philosophy. It's really about connectivity. And then you get to look at each space you're connecting, and then those things can have a life of their own, a different plan, a different vision, but it's still all core about that connectivity that Karen mentioned.
Something that I think, that's coming up for me is just, over the last decade or so with the Bayou Greenways initiative and the way that we have connected up so many of the bayous, this absolutely makes sense how you're thinking about connection, but it also Buffalo Bayou, as much as these are neighborhood parks you're designing, and as much as I'm sure the neighborhood is excited, you're absolutely right. It is a destination park. It is certainly one of the most recognizable and most everybody's out there on Saturday kind of parks in town. It's like Herman Memorial, Buffalo Bayou,
Right.
pick your destination. And so I think what's really exciting for me as I'm hearing you talk about this, both the way that you're thinking about new phases that can be more integrated in the neighborhoods that can marry some of those goals, is also just historically. I mean, Buffalo Bayou is the central figure of Houston. It is in many ways the reason Houston exists and is this kind of foundational point. And so thinking of it as an ongoing source of connection, an ongoing source of storing, as you were talking about, this Hispanic archive and library and the resources that can provide to community. I think that's it recenters and refocuses in some way our attention to Buffalo Bayou as this kind of spiritual heart of the city that actually I think people have kind of bought into by and large over the
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
few decades in particular. It is certainly it's hard for me to meet Houstonians who don't have some kind of relationship to Buffalo Bayou, largely through the parks themselves. But I think that's really exciting for a place to grow. I know one of the things that Sophia and I wanted to ask you about is as this 10-year plan starts to almost wind down now that you're at the halfway mark and the 30-year plan continues on, what are ways that folks can get involved if they want to learn more about Buffalo Bayou Preserve, if they want to get invested in this 10-year plan or the 30-year plan? How can folks learn more about what you're doing and participate?
There are a lot of ways. As Ian said, so much of it is lives on our website, but beyond that, um, one of our greatest joys right now is to walk folks through what we're doing east of downtown. It's our
Mm.
passion, as you can tell. And so we would love to talk to anybody and everybody more about this work. Right now, we don't, all the trail connections don't exist yet. So we have to find other ways to take people through, whether it's on our
Mm.
pontoon boat or whether it's, driving through the neighborhood and visiting some of these sites or whether it's
I have
looking
to
to it's
stop,
online
pause,
together.
sorry, and say if you haven't been on the pontoon boat and you remotely can find a way onto it, do so because it is a wonderful tour. I
So, and that
took a
that
group of
actually you can
students.
find, our buffalobayou.org has all the information. So if you want to book a ticket on a public tour, you can do that very easily. And it's a hidden gem. Not everybody knows you can get on a boat and travel down Buffalo Bayou, but it gives you a totally different perspective on our city, whether you're going east or west of downtown. So the boat launches from right here at Allen's Landing, where we're sitting now, which is, as you had mentioned, the history of Houston. This is known as the birthplace of the city of Houston as we know it today. And the boat leaves from here currently. So that's one way. We do have a membership program, and that membership program is largely driven by, people who have a desire to support our mission. So it is, gives you a sense of ownership as you're walking along those trails in Buffalo Bayou Park. So many people will say, oh, I travel those trails every single day. I know every inch of these trails. I've heard it so many times from people. Becoming a member gives you a more official sense of ownership of, hey, this is my park. This is this is my neighborhood. I support this. Whether it's really literally your neighborhood or whether it's just the place you like to go on Saturday mornings to take a walk or a run. So that's a different way for people to get involved. And then we have a ton of public programs every year, as well as special events. We have a cocktail party coming up on May 14th, I believe it is, 13th or 14th, called Cocktails in Bloom, that we do every springtime. This year it's at a really special spot called Lost Lake, which is in Buffalo Bayou Park. Our gala's in the fall, so those are some other ways to celebrate the mission and get more involved.
And if I can just add one other thing,
Please.
there's great things to be involved in, but you can also literally get involved. We have tremendous amount of community engagement ongoing about projects, what we're doing, what people want included. I mean, literally, you can make your mark by telling us what you want. One of the most fun engagement events we had was we invited all the neighborhoods in the East End and all the schools to come to Tony Moore Park and design a playground. And so literally the kids drew pictures. My daughter's still very upset we didn't come up with the octopus water fountain.
It was a purple octopus that his daughter drew. We're doing an armadillo instead.
There's a tremendous armadillo, and it takes after the Alhambra animals that are multicolored and all of that. But these are ideas of kids, right? And they're the ones that literally are shaping these parks. We're creating a barbecue pavilion and community barbecue pits for events and individuals to come out and do that. It's a very big, cultural thing in the neighborhood, but a lot of people love to do it. And that input wasn't ours. We didn't come up with say we're going to do this. The people really come out. So you want to be involved, you can literally come out and shape this stuff. A lot of meetings,
particularly for people in these neighborhoods. Yeah, if anybody who is listening to this lives in East End and Fifth Ward and is not involved in our work, we want to hear your voice.
It's terrific. Well, that's the time that we have for today. I really appreciate the two of you taking the time. Ian Rosenberg, Karen Farber, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
This brings us to the end of our talk with Karen Farber and Ian Rosenberg about Buffalo Bayou Partnership's important work on the Buffalo Bayou East 10-year master plan and beyond. Want to learn more about the present and future plans of the partnership? If so, head over to the partnership's website at www.buffalobayou.org to learn more of the fascinating work being done and to get involved. Up next, my fellow intern Nomin will explore which types of milk are the most environmentally friendly and how you can choose the one that best aligns with your sustainability goals.
You walk into your favorite cafe. Maybe it's chilly morning and you need that extra bit of cozy warmth. Or maybe you just need your fix of caffeine. When you go up to the counter to order your go-to drink, maybe a brown sugar latte or a matcha, you are faced with a difficult decision. The barista asks, would you like that with regular milk or an alternative milk? Being the environmentally conscious person you are, you want to make the right choice for the planet. But which milk is the best choice for the planet? You think oat sounds sustainable. Almond milk sounds good too. Maybe pea milk or rice milk even? Dairy is, well, dairy. So let's get to the bottom of it. Which milk is best for the environment? Is there a clear winner, or is the solution more milky than clear? Let's find out. Let's start with a classic choice. Dairy milk. It's what many of us grew up on. We either poured it over cereal, mixed it into mac and cheese, maybe we even drank it in a questionable school cafeteria carton. But environmentally, dairy milk is a heavy hitter and not in a good way. It's hard to ignore the emissions, land use, and water consumption that dairy milk produces. Producing dairy milk requires 9 times more land than most plant-based alternatives. For water consumption, cows drink a lot of water, and their feed also requires a steady supply. Dairy farming is also one of the leading sources of methane, a greenhouse gas. Cows release methane during digestion, and there's already around 9.3 million dairy cows in the US alone. Manure runoff from these milk cows also produces waste, billions of liters a year, that often pollutes rivers and streams. The next milk you might consider is rice milk. However, rice farming is water intensive and is also a surprising source of methane. Rice paddies often create the perfect low oxygen environment for methane producing bacteria. In the US, Rice farming often relies on pesticides that may run off into water supplies. Now, let's consider almond milk. Probably one of the more well-known alternative milks, it is everywhere. However, environmentally, almond milk is a mixed bag. Almonds themselves have a relatively low greenhouse gas footprint, and land use is more moderate compared to dairy. However, the main issue with almond milk is its water usage. Over 3.2 gallons of water are required to produce a single almond. Most almonds also happen to be grown in California in the US, one of the most drought-prone regions in the US. Let's put that into perspective now. A 200 milliliter glass of almond milk, which is less than a cup, uses about 74 liters of water to produce. That's the same amount of water that you would use in a full shower. So if you live in a water-stressed area or are trying to be more mindful of water consumption, almond milk might not be the best choice. Well, how about pea milk? Pea milk, as the name suggests, is made from yellow split peas. Peas require significantly less water than almonds and rice. They're typically grown in cooler and wetter regions so that they don't need heavy irrigation that other crops may need. Peas are also nitrogen fixers, so they pull nitrogen from the atmosphere and push it back into the soil, which reduces the need for fertilizers, which in turn means fewer nitrous oxide emissions, which is another harmful greenhouse gas. Overall, it has a lower water, emission, and deforestation impact than some of the other contenders on the list. Now, let's consider oat milk. Compared to almond milk's 74 liters per glass, oat milk uses just about 9 liters of water for the same 200 milliliter serving. That's over 8 times less water than almond milk, and more than 13 times less than cow's milk. In terms of greenhouse gases, oat milk's carbon footprint is about 0.18 kilograms of carbon dioxide per liter, which is over 80% lower than dairy milk. It also produces fewer emissions than soy, rice, or almond in some life cycle analyses. Oats need 80% less land than dairy, and significantly less than almonds and rice. While oats do use slightly more land than peas or soy, they're often grown in temperate climates like the US, Canada, or Northern Europe, which means that their cultivation generally doesn't involve tropical deforestation. Finally, let's take a look at soy milk. Environmentally speaking, soy milk uses less water than oat, way less than almond or rice, and of course, much less than dairy. It is also a low-emission option, producing about 0.195 kilograms of carbon dioxide per liter, a dramatic drop from the dairy's 3.2 kilograms per liter. Soy also does well in terms of land use. It needs less than 1/10 of the land that dairy does, and even slightly less than oats and almond. Soybeans are also nitrogen fixers, like peas. However, the main concern with soy milk is the deforestation aspect. Soy farming has been linked to large-scale land clearing and biodiversity loss. However, around 77% of global soy production actually goes toward the animal feed, not towards soy milk. Only about 7% of soy ends up in human food products like tofu, soy sauce, or plant milks. So, after all of that discussion, which milk is the best for our planet? Well, if you're just stepping away from dairy, almost any plant-based alternative is already a step in the right direction. Compared to cow's milk, they all use less water, less land, and produce fewer greenhouse gases. However, if you're trying to fine-tune your impact further, rice and almond milks are probably best in moderation. Soy, oat, and pea, however, are strong all-rounders with relatively low water use and relatively low emissions. In the end, it's not about choosing the perfect milk. It's about making a better choice more often. Whether that means switching to oat in your coffee, trying pea milk in your smoothie, or just being a little more mindful at the grocery store, all of these small swaps add up. So the next time you're standing at the cafe counter, staring down at all the milk options, you'll know exactly which option to pick and why it matters.
As Nomin mentioned, supporting the environment often starts with small lifestyle changes. Another powerful step is learning more. And with that in mind, you will now hear from Scott Solomon about a fascinating creature that you might recognize, but not know much about. Welcome back to Critter Corner, where we dive into Houston's fascinating wildlife. In each episode, we feature experts and enthusiasts who share their favorite local flora and fauna, their role in our ecosystem, and finally, ways that we can all support our community's biodiversity. In this episode, we're joined by Dr. Scott Solomon, a biologist, ecology and evolutionary biology professor at Rice University, and host of the amazing Wild World podcast. Welcome to the show, Dr. Solomon.
Thank you.
Of course. So to start off, can you tell me a bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I am a teaching professor of biosciences, and I teach classes in introductory biology, ecology and evolutionary biology, and science communication. And so, in addition to being a professor, I'm also a science communicator. So, I do a lot of writing and speaking about science, and have a podcast called Wild World about science and scientific exploration. And yeah, I just love sharing science with anybody who's interested.
Yeah, well, I love learning and I'm super excited to talk to you today. So let's go ahead and dive in. Can you tell us
Sounds
about
good.
what species you're talking about today and why it's special to you?
Well, my research background is in evolutionary biology, but specifically for my PhD and my postdoctoral work, I studied ants, and in particular, a group of ants that are kind of well known called leafcutter ants. So, most people have probably seen these like on nature documentaries, or maybe if you've been, to the tropics, seen them out in the wild. But the species that is sort of most near and dear to my heart is a species called Atta texana, which is our Texas leafcutter ant. And so, people don't always realize that we have leafcutter ants right here in Texas, but in fact, we do. And I just think they're amazing.
Yeah, me as well. I remember when I was a kid, I would love watching them just make their little trails. But I would love to hear a little more about what role the leafcutter ant plays in Texas ecosystems.
Yeah, so they play a number of different roles in ecosystems. We don't necessarily think of ants as being herbivores. Like most ants are predators and scavengers. But these ants, as the name leafcutter suggests, they do cut leaves. They don't actually eat the leaves themselves. They bring the leaves into their underground nests, and then they feed the leaves to a fungus that they're actually growing as a crop. So they are farming, which is one of the things that I find amazing. And so they then are able to eat the fungus, which has broken down the leaves. And so they're indirectly acquiring nutrients and energy from the leaves via the fungus. And because they are consuming and cutting and feeding to the fungus large amounts of leaves, they actually play a major role in ecosystems as herbivores. So they are capable of cutting down like an enormous amount of leaf material in a short amount of time. The thing that we often say is they can defoliate a single tree overnight, which technically is true. They don't usually pick just one tree and cut all the leaves, but that is, gives you a sense for what they're capable
Mhm.
of. So that's one role that they play. But another important role that they play is because they're bringing these leaves underground and they have enormous underground nests. They are, and they're growing fungus, and they actually also have like underground dump waste chambers where they store all of their trash, and also it also serves as a cemetery, so it's where dead ants go. So they're also bringing organic material deep underground, and in that way, they're really important in nutrient cycling. So they're helping to fertilize the soil, which of course is helpful for plants and other organisms. So those are two of the really important roles that they play in ecosystems.
Well, thank you for that. And now, what's one surprising fact about this species that people might not know?
One surprising fact is that they are able to use antibiotics to control disease. So, this is something that we thought humans invented. But leafcutter ants and other ants that grow fungi, so fungus farming ants, they actually cultivate bacteria either on their bodies, like on their exoskeletons, or in their gardens. And those bacteria are producing antibiotic compounds. And what those antibiotics are doing are helping to control any sort of pests in the garden, in the nest. So there are other types of fungi that can come in and attack and even wipe out the fungal crop that these ants are growing. And of course, if they do that, it's devastating for the ants because that's their one and only food source. And so by cultivating bacteria that are producing antibiotics, they basically have their own pharmacies within their nests that they're using to control disease. So something we thought was a uniquely human invention. Turns out ants have been doing this for probably something like 50 to 60 million years.
Just out of curiosity, are any of these antibiotics the same or similar to the ones that we as humans use, or have we been able to learn anything from these leafcutter ants?
Yeah, great question. That is definitely something that people are interested in. So these antibiotics are a bit different from the types of antibiotics that we use clinically to treat infections, but there is, as you might imagine, interest in like seeing could these be used, for example, in like, an agricultural context. We're always in human agriculture trying to find new ways of combating pests. So perhaps treating fungal disease in crops. So there is active research going on to try to see are there ways that we can take advantage of these antibiotics that
Yeah.
ants, again, have been using for so long.
Finally, what are some simple ways that people can support the leafcutter ant?
Yeah, so I think one of the things to recognize is that this is a native ant species. As I said, it performs important ecological services here. And, often here in Texas in particular, I think we're really sort of used to thinking about ants as our enemies, as pests. We all know fire ants. We've all had unpleasant encounters with fire ants. Fire ants are a non-native species, at least the one that we're most familiar with, the red imported fire ant. And so, we tend to see ants and think, oh, well, let's try to kill them. Let's try to control them. Let's get rid of them. I think just recognizing that leafcutter ants are a native species that's important, and we should try to live with them rather than to try to kill them or eliminate them. Just admire them for the amazing natural wonders that they are, and hopefully they're not cutting your rose bushes or your citrus trees. They sometimes do that, but yeah, if you can just sort of appreciate them for what they are and not kill them, hopefully.
Yeah, maybe you can think of them as your natural gardeners. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Solomon. It's been great to chat with you about the Texas leafcutter ant.
Thanks so much.
And to everyone listening, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to come back soon to learn more about these fascinating local species. Before wrapping up the episode, I'll be talking about some ways to participate in environmental initiatives in the Houston area during this upcoming week. Consider coming to the Trailblazing for Tomorrow 2025 Bash on Wednesday, May 7th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. This event, hosted by the Coastal Prairie Conservancy, is perfect for those who are interested in aiding conservation efforts across the Conservancy's 9-county priority region. If you attend, you'll have the chance to make a real difference in the Texas environment. If you want to find out more about this event, check out the Coastal Prairie Conservancy's website. All proceeds will support conservation, restoration, education, and outreach programs. If you're looking for some more conservation work, you may want to check out the Galveston Bay Foundation's Nursery Workday on Thursday, May 8th from 8 to 11 a.m. You'll be helping out by weeding and potting plants, as well as general greenhouse management and seasonal maintenance needs. No experience is necessary for this event, so feel free to bring along the whole family to get involved. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week with more ways to get involved with environmental work in the area. If you have questions or ideas for what you would like to be featured on Gulf Streams, please leave a voicemail at 713-348-4081 or email us at westonT@rice.edu. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies, with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. Produced by Western Twardowski. Co-produced by Joseph Campana. Audio engineer Rico Enriquez, Blue Viatoro. Original music by Carter Dean. Research support provided by Jaden Brayboyce, Sophia Saltis, and Nama Rinstore. Stay tuned for the R&R Show with Ronnie Renfro and Tom Richards, here on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM. Thanks for listening.